The twin suns of Nexus Prime hung oppressively in the sky, beating down on Spire City like molten hammers. Heat shimmered off the sand-hued streets and waves, blurring the ornate spires and archways that curved overhead, some carved by hand, others grown through alien bioorganic means that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. The buildings loomed like skeletal giants sculpted from sandstone and bone, casting long curved shadows onto the winding pathways below. Clark Davis moved with a purposeful limp through the near-empty street, his boots grinding into sun-baked stone. His military-grade environmental suit whirred faintly, its cooling units struggling to keep pace with the sweltering heat. Sweat still clung to his brow, sticky beneath his collar. The negotiations with the Merchant Guild had dragged on for 7 brutal hours, and now, instead of resting in the cool sanctuary of the embassy's compound, he was navigating this open furnace on foot. "Damn heat," he muttered, wiping his forehead with a sleeve. The suit might be designed for survival, but it didn't make the world any less miserable. Spire City was silent at this hour. The locals, Nexians, traders, and off-world scavengers alike knew better than to be outdoors during peak burn. Only the truly desperate, or the stupid, risked the streets now. That was why the shape in the shadow of a sweeping arch caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, just another pile of wind-blown debris clinging to the side of a building. But as he approached, the silhouette sharpened. A figure, a girl, sitting on the ground, knees drawn up, arms loosely wrapped around herself like makeshift armor. She wasn't human. That was obvious even from a distance. Her skin was pale blue, almost translucent in places, and shimmered subtly in the heat haze. Silver-white hair spilled over her shoulders in tangled, dust-matted waves. She wore a simple garment-worn cloth, patched too many times, sleeves fraying at the edges. But it wasn't her poverty that struck Clark. It was her bearing. Even slouched against a wall, half hidden in shadow, there was something poised about her, something noble. Her spine wasn't hunched in defeat, it was straight, her chin lifted. And when she looked up at him with those eyes like mercury, molten and unreadable, he stopped in his tracks. She didn't speak, didn't ask for anything. Her gaze said she expected nothing, which was exactly why he reached into the interior pocket of his suit and pulled out a small, foil-wrapped rectangle, his last bar of sustainome, chocolate-based, laced with dense nutrients, meant to last a soldier or diplomat several days in the field. Nearly priceless on a frontier planet like this. He held it out without ceremony. "Here," he said. The girl eyed it as though it might explode. Her voice, when it came, was low and melodic, tinged with suspicion. "People don't give things away here. Not without wanting something in return." Clark shrugged. "Humans know what it's like to be hungry, and if we can help, we should." He crouched just low enough to place the bar beside her, then stood and turned to leave. "Wait," she said behind him. He glanced back. "What's your name?" "Clark Davis." He gave a faint nod, then resumed walking. The sun bore down harder, dragging heat waves across his back. But somehow, it felt lighter. Behind him, in the shadow of the wall, the girl watched him go. Her mercury eyes narrowed slightly. Slowly, deliberately, she picked up the chocolate bar and tucked it beneath the folds of her tunic into a hidden pocket sewn with the precision of a palace seamstress. Then, for just a moment, the corners of her mouth curved not in gratitude, but in calculation. The grand gates of the sovereign's palace rose like something pulled from the dreams of ancient earth, then sculpted through the mind of a star-born god. Towering arches spiraled toward the sky, woven from a living crystalline material that shimmered with faint inner light. As Clark stepped inside, the heat of Spire City melted away, replaced by a cool breath of floral-scented air. Bioluminescent. Flora, bred to bloom in palace corridors, cast soft glows of violet and blue on the walls, their tendrils curling gently at the edges of the path. He should have been focused. These weren't the dusty market negotiations he'd dealt with days earlier. This was a formal summons from the highest authority on Nexus Prime. The sovereign himself had requested his presence to elevate trade discussions. That meant politics, ceremony, and stiff posturing behind golden goblets and diplomatic platitudes. Clark adjusted his Earth Federation formal jacket black, sharply cut, with a narrow blue sash, and followed a robed attendant into the audience chamber. The hall was breathtaking. Columns of golden stone, seemingly unsupported, reached hundreds of feet into the air. Above, transparent ceilings opened to the twin suns, softened by a biofilm that filtered their harshness into something warm and amber. The walls pulsed with embedded crystals, glowing gently like a heartbeat. He barely had time to absorb the grandeur when the sovereign entered. Tall, regal, and unmistakably alien, the sovereign wore layered robes embroidered with shifting silver threads. His skin was a deeper blue than most Nexians Clark had seen, patterned with subtle lines that glowed with age and wisdom. Behind him walked his advisors, dozens of them, but Clark barely registered any of it, because flanking the sovereign's right side, dressed in a flowing gown that rippled like liquid starlight, was the girl from the street. Gone were the tattered sleeves, the dust-smeared cheeks. Her silver hair was combed and adorned with tiny crystals that sparkled as she walked. Her posture hadn't changed. It was still poised, proud, but now it was clear why she hadn't been pretending to be noble. She was noble. Clark's steps faltered, and he barely caught himself before bowing too late. "Ambassador Davis?" The sovereign boomed, though there was a tinge of mirth beneath his formal voice. "Welcome to our court. May I present my daughter, Princess Lenara of the House of Tveser." She stepped forward, her eyes never leaving his. There was a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, sharp, amused, familiar. "I believe we've already met," she said smoothly. Clark stared at her. For a moment, words refused to come. I didn't realize." He stammered. "That I was royalty?" she offered. Her voice was silk, but her eyes were dancing with amusement. "Most don't." The sovereign chuckled as he descended his throne. "It seems you made quite the impression, Ambassador. My daughter spoke of a human who gave away his last ration to a stranger in the street. Such acts are rare among our kind, even rarer from outsiders." Clark cleared his throat. "I didn't know who she was. She just looked like she needed it." "She did," Lenara said, and there was something in her tone, half gratitude, half challenge. He looked at her again and saw not just a princess, but the same woman he had seen in the alley. Proud, watchful, unknowable. Later, after the official introductions had ended, and the sovereign's inner circle had withdrawn to private corners, Clark found himself walking beside Lenara through the crystalline gardens just outside the hall. The bioluminescent plants swayed gently as if listening. "You don't seem surprised," she said, tilting her head. "I'm stunned," he admitted. "Just not the way you think. That girl in the alley, ... You wore rags like armor, but you held yourself like a queen." Her gaze softened. "And you, human, gave me something precious without hesitation. In this world, that kind of gesture is nearly extinct." "It wasn't much," Clark said. "Out here, kindness is the rarest currency," she replied, pausing beneath an arch of glowing vines. "And you spent it all on me." Silence lingered between them, not awkward, charged. Something unspoken hovered in the air, crackling like a live current. Then, lightly, she added, "Besides, I've grown curious about human customs. Perhaps you'd care to educate me." Clark chuckled. "I'd be honored." "Good," she said, already turning toward a side corridor. Because our next meeting will not involve trade delegations or bodyguards. He blinked. And what will it involve? She looked back at him, a sly smile on her lips, eyes gleaming like starlight reflected in liquid silver. Cultural exchange. Asterisk, the Z. Ceremonial chamber was nothing like the rest of the palace. It sat hidden beneath the main structure, carved into the living rock of Nexus Prime itself. Here, the walls pulsed faintly with natural bioluminescence, not unlike the soft glow of sea creatures in Earth's deepest trenches. Ancient glyphs, unreadable to most humans, glowed in pale silver along the floor, forming a 7-pointed star that centered around a raised dais. Clark stood on that platform now, the cool stone radiating a strange warmth into his boots. He stared up at the vaulted ceiling, where translucent crystals formed constellations that slowly rotated above his head. He couldn't help but feel like he was standing in the center of the galaxy, observed not just by Nexians, but by time itself. Lenara stood across from him, dressed not in royal robes, but in ceremonial attire designed for the Path of 7 Stars. Her outfit was sleek, almost battle-ready, woven with shifting metallic threads that shimmered with each breath. Her silver hair was bound tightly, revealing the elegant lines of her neck and the subtle markings that glowed just beneath. Her skin, her eyes, those haunting mercury eyes, held no trace of playfulness now. Only fierce purpose. Asterisk. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, her voice low and intimate despite the echoing chamber. "No human has ever attempted the 7 stars. Many Nexians fail. It's not a game, Clark." Clark stepped forward, holding her gaze. "You said it yourself. In your society, the heart's choice can override any arrangement. It's the only path to make this official between us." Her expression wavered for a breath, and then she smiled. "Then let the stars judge you?" The trial of wisdom came first. Clark found himself seated at a long table in the palace archives. Ancient tomes and holographic scrolls laid before him. High scholars watched silently from alcoves above, waiting. Lenara sat across from him, quizzing him on everything from Nexian dynastic lineage to their sacred myths of star-forged unions. The questions were brutal, the texts dense, and yet Clark found it easier than expected. He'd spent countless evenings with Lenara in these same archives. Her teasing way of guiding him through their history, her habit of tapping him on the shoulder when he lost focus, or whispering the real meaning behind confusing metaphors. Even now, she couldn't help herself leaning forward, her voice low, her fingers brushing his wrist when he answered correctly. "You're distracting me," he muttered. "Consider it." "Motivation," she purred, lips close enough to send heat across his skin. He passed the first trial with ease, but it wasn't the knowledge alone. It was the shared time that had engraved it into him. The trial of strength followed the next day. A Nexian combat master met him in the open arena beneath. The twin suns. Nexian fighting relied on reading electromagnetic pulses, a sixth sense Clark did not possess. His opponent moved like liquid shadow, reading the air before each strike. Clark lost, twice, but then something changed. He stopped trying to fight like a Nexian. He fought like a human feints, unpredictability, reckless angles. His instincts, honed during years of diplomatic fieldwork in dangerous sectors, took over. He ducked a lightning-fast jab and rolled beneath the strike, using the Nexians' momentum to bring him down. By the fourth match, the master lay on the sand, chest heaving. "Innovation," the master croaked. "Very human. Very effective." Trial 2 passed. Then came the trial of endurance. Clark was dropped into the great wastes beyond the city with only a water recycler, a solar tarp, and one ration. 3 days. No contact. No aid. The sun clawed at his back, the sand scorched his eyes, and on the second night, A razor storm shredded half his shelter. He kept going, kept moving. On the final morning, dehydrated and burning, he pulled the last of his ration from his pack. Not it was a crumpled wrapper, the empty chocolate bar from that day in the street. He smiled and pressed it to his lips like a talisman, whispering, "One step at a time." When he staggered back into the palace, sunburned and half-conscious, Lenara was there waiting. She ran to him, protocol forgotten, and caught him before he fell. "You idiot," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to go that far." Clark managed a crooked smile. "Didn't I?" That night, as he lay in recovery beneath cool healing lights, she sat beside him, holding his hand. Her skin glowed faintly in the dark, and her presence in his mind, soft and curious, felt stronger than ever. "You've passed 3 trials," she whispered. 4 remain. He turned his head toward her, breath shallow. "Then don't leave my side," he said, "because I think the hardest ones are still ahead." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply leaned down and pressed her forehead to his, letting the quiet hum of their growing bond speak for them both. Asterisk. The council chamber buzzed with tension, every word spoken a thread in a fragile web stretched tight across the room. Nobles in flowing robes, adorned with family sigils of light and metal, murmured anxiously beneath the crystalline dome. Earth Federation envoys lined one side of the chamber, stiff-backed and quiet, their polished uniforms catching the sunbeams that filtered through the geometric skylight's dot. At the center of it all stood Clark Davis, flanked by Princess Lenara, their shoulders squared beneath the weight of a galaxy's gaze. Sovereign, Tveser's voice rang through the chamber like a bell of judgment. "The Crown Consortium's ultimatum is clear. Either we sever ties with Earth, or face total economic isolation." A flurry of reactions, gasps, protests, whispered outrage. Clark didn't flinch. He met the sovereign's gaze and said, calmly but firmly, "They're bluffing." "Bluffing?" echoed High Advisor Keln, an elder with skin like polished stone and no love for outsiders. "The consortium controls 6 major trade routes. Without them, our outer provinces will collapse." "They control fear," Clark corrected. "But fear only lasts until something better takes its place." "And what, Ambassador Davis?" Keln sneered. "Do you propose?" "War. Earth can't fight our battles." Clark stepped forward, the chamber's light glinting off the small item he held in his hand. He raised it slowly. A bar of chocolate dot confusion rippled through the room. "This," Clark said, holding it up for all to see, "is what started it. A gesture, a risk, a choice. I gave this to someone who looked like she had nothing, someone who turned out to be a princess." A flicker of a smile touched Lenara's lips. "This chocolate bar doesn't just represent sustenance," Clark continued. "It represents kindness, humanity, the idea that we can offer something without demanding a price. And that is terrifying to people like the Crown." Skeptical murmurs rose again. "You propose we fight a trade embargo with candy?" Another noble mocked. Lenara stepped beside Clark, her voice slicing cleanly through the noise. "Not candy. Hope." The chamber stilled. "Our world is strained," she said. "Resources are scarce. Our people survive, not thrive. Earth, however, has technologies we've barely begun to integrate: agriculture suited for hostile environments, solar net systems, atmospheric regulators." Clark took over seamlessly. "Let us prove what humanity can offer, not with weapons, but by transforming. A barren moon under Crown control. A pilot project. If they see a dead world bloom, they'll understand what's at stake and what's possible." Silence. Sovereign Tveser leaned forward on his throne, considering. "And if they refuse?" "Then we stand," Lenara said. "Together, not as 2 species, but as one bond." Her hand brushed Clark's. Their empathic link flared bright in that moment, shimmering echo through the Nexian nobles attuned to such things. The room felt it. Not just the words, but the pulse beneath them. Unity. A decision was made in that silence. Not just by the sovereign, but by a council that had feared the unknown until they were shown a path through it. When the session adjourned, Clark and Lenara returned to their chambers without speaking. The moment the doors slid shut, Clark let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "That was either the boldest or stupidest thing I've ever done," he muttered. Lenara stepped in front of him, her gown shifting like molten starlight. "It was the most human thing you've ever done. And that's why it worked." Their bond was warm, steady, full of unspoken admiration. Later that night, they stood on their terrace overlooking the desert. The moons hung low, casting soft silver light on the sands. Below, the city glowed like a nest of starlight. "I still can't believe it," Clark murmured. "One bar of chocolate." "And a man who didn't look away," Lenara said gently. He turned to her. Her skin glowed faintly in the night, responding to the thrum of their bond. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" he asked. "We already did," she whispered. Then, with no more need for words, she kissed him beneath the twin moons. Their hearts beat in rhythm, their minds humming in harmony. Tomorrow, they would begin preparing to change a world. But tonight, they allowed themselves one quiet moment of triumph. And somewhere, deep in Lenara's private chamber, the empty foil wrapper of that first chocolate bar sat, nestled in a crystal case unseen by the world, but treasured more than any crown. The moon they chose was called Tveser, barren, wind-scoured, and long written off by the Crown Consortium as a lifeless rock. It circled a dying star and whispered dust across its surface like a planet trying to forget it had once hoped to live. Now, under the combined leadership of Earth and Nexus Prime, it would become something entirely new. Clark stood on the observation platform of the terraforming station, watching as the first green bloom shimmered beneath the glass of an atmospheric dome. Human tech-adapted water reclamation systems, nutrient synthesis modules buzzed softly, feeding the air and coaxing stubborn soil into surrender. Nexian bioarchitects had woven their living crystal roots into the infrastructure, making the S-structure, making the Oz. Machines hum in perfect, organic harmony. He could still hardly believe it. A few months ago, he'd walked through scorching streets with nothing but a chocolate bar in his pocket. Now they were changing the surface of worlds. Behind him, the soft chime of the chamber door drew his attention. Lenara entered without ceremony, dressed in a soft wrap of flowing silver cloth that clung to her like it had chosen her over gravity. Her skin pulsed with a soft inner light, the way it always did when emotions ran high. But tonight, the color shimmered in patterns he hadn't seen before. Gentle, delicate, reverent. He knew something was coming before she said a word. They tried again, she murmured, stepping beside him. Another attempt. Different world. Same method. Plasma burst. Close range. Clark's hand tightened on the rail. "Is everyone okay?" "This time," she said. "But we both know what this is. They're afraid of us. They should be." Their eyes met. A bond between them had deepened beyond words. Even without speaking, he could feel the thrum of her anxiety pressed against his own steady pulse. Beneath that, something else stirred. A quieter vibration. Expectant, hopeful. She reached into the folds of her robe and withdrew a small data crystal. She placed it gently on the console beside him, her hand lingering for a heartbeat too long. Clark frowned slightly. "What's this?" "Research," she said. "Royal Science Division. Quietly authorized by my father after our bonding trial. They've been studying us." "Us?" "Our connection. The empathic bond. The mental synchrony. It shouldn't be possible, Clark. Not just between human and Nexian, but at the depth we've reached. He stared at her, at the faint golden blush rising beneath her skin. What did they find? She hesitated, then stepped closer, taking his hand. Her fingers trembled slightly. They believe we've evolved something new, something unprecedented. And then her voice dropped to a whisper, trembling like a string pulled taut. They think I'm pregnant. Time-stilled Clark blinked. His heart, already racing from the threat of assassins and the weight of interstellar diplomacy, suddenly thundered with an entirely different force. Pregnant? He echoed, his voice barely a breath. She nodded, her smile small but radiant. They're calling it the first light, a fusion of our biology. Nexian structure, human resilience. A perfect bond. Clark stepped back, not from fear, but awe. But no one knew if that was even possible. No one believed it was, she said. Until us. Their bond pulsed so hard, it felt like standing in the eye of a storm. Emotion, electric, and wild arced between them love, fear, hope, disbelief, and something primal that had no name in either language. He reached out, gently placing his hand over her stomach. Through the bond, he felt something faint. Not quite a thought, not quite a feeling, but there. I don't know how to be a father, he said, the words dry in his mouth. You didn't know how to be a diplomat to my people either, she replied, her voice trembling with laughter and tears, but you learned. They sank together to the cushioned bench at the edge of the viewing window. Outside, Tveser's sky rippled with faint aurora's atmospheric layers beginning to form, stirred by human generators and Nexian roots. Inside, everything had changed. They talked for hours in soft voices, planning futures neither of them had dared to dream aloud. About names. About how the child might look silver-haired and earthborn, glowing with empathy and ambition. About the world they would build, not just for their daughter, but for every other soul in the galaxy, too afraid to love across species. Later that night, as they lay in their private chamber, Lenara curled against him, her voice soft against his chest. I used to believe our kind could never truly mix, she whispered. That it was a romantic story told by dreamers. And now? Now I know dreamers were right all along. He kissed her temple, breathing in the quiet wonder of the moment, then reached toward the bedside drawer and pulled out a small crystal frame. Inside it, perfectly preserved, sat the crumpled wrapper of a chocolate bar. He held it between them, smiling. Who knew, he said, that kindness could change the future? She smiled back, resting her hand over his heart. It didn't just change. The future, she whispered. It created it. Asterisk, the interspecies cultural center, stood at the heart of the capital, gleaming under the twin suns like a monument carved from hope itself. Its architecture blended Earth's sleek, linear elegance with the organic curves and radiant crystalwork of Nexian design. Towering glass walls shimmered with embedded light-reactive panels that danced with color as beings of all species moved within. Clark Davis stood on the upper observation deck, dressed in ceremonial robes that bore both the sigil of the Earth, Federation, and the royal crest of Nexus Prime. His posture was calm, dignified, but through the bond, Lenara could feel his heart hammering in his chest. She stepped beside him, her hand slipping easily into his, her belly now slightly rounded beneath her gown. They're here, she whispered below. A crowd of delegates, citizens, and press from across the galaxy had gathered for the official inauguration. Holodrones hovered like glimmering insects, recording every breath, every glance, every tremor of history in the making. Clark exhaled slowly. Remember when this all started with a single chocolate bar? Lenara smiled, her silvery hair fluttering in the warm breeze. And a human too stubborn to walk past a stranger. They descended the steps together, hand in hand, met by cheers and shimmering light displays. The Galactic Council's highest representatives stood waiting, ceremonial documents in hand, ready to ratify the Interspecies Rights Act, a treaty that would legally protect bonds like theirs. Bonds once thought unnatural, dangerous, impossible. Ambassador Davis, Princess Lenara, the High Counselor began, her voice amplified through gentle acoustic spheres. 5 years ago, your union was viewed as scandalous. A novelty? An anomaly. Chuckles rippled through the assembly. Today, you stand as the vanguard of a new galactic era. The declaration was signed in lighter radiant arc of energy. Passing from human to Nexian, to Endorian to Crown, each representative adding their pulse to the circuit. When the circle closed, the treaty glowed golden and faded into permanent interstellar record. The crowd erupted, but for Clark and Lenara, the moment was quiet. Their bond pulsed with a deep, silent resonance. A hum beneath the skin. A harmony of soul. After the ceremony, they slipped away from the reception and made their way to a familiar place down winding alleys of the old quarter, to the very spot where he had first seen her. A girl in rags beneath a curved wall, half hidden. In shadow. It looked different now. Cleaner. Quiet. A small monument stood there now, crafted from glass and crystal, its inscription glowing softly. One small act of kindness can spark the light that leads civilizations. Clark knelt and placed something at the base of the monument. A new chocolate bar, this one wrapped in co-designed packaging. A blend of earth foil and Nexian biofilm, created by a joint food research team. Safe, nutritious, and now shared across hundreds of worlds. Lenara raised an eyebrow. Making offerings to fate? He smiled, honoring the moment that started everything. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the stone streets, they walked back slowly, quietly. Lenara rested a hand over her belly. She kicked, she said suddenly, laughing softly. She does that when she senses strong emotion. She's definitely ours then, Clark said, grinning. Drama already. Later that evening, they returned to the Cultural Center's private lounge, where representatives from dozens of species waited for the first interspecies bonding seminar. A young couple, a human and a soft-voiced Andorian, approached hesitantly. Ambassador, Princess, your story inspired us, the human said nervously. We want to try the bonding ritual. We're told it's intense. Clark and Lenara exchanged a look. It is, Lenara said, her eyes glowing faintly. But it's also real. That's what makes it worth everything. The seminar began with Clark recounting the story in his own words. Not the official version, the real one. He held up a framed object, the original wrapper, crinkled, faded, but preserved like sacred parchment. It began with a choice, he said, to share what little I had with someone who seemed to have nothing. I had no idea I was looking at a princess, and she had no idea she was about to change my life forever. Lenara added softly, he didn't see a title. He saw a person. And I saw something I hadn't in a very long time: genuine kindness. Their story concluded in silence, the kind born from deep respect. That night, as stars blinked to life above Nexus Prime, and the twin moons rose in tandem, they returned to their private chambers. The atmosphere had been tuned lighting low, the walls pulsing in sync with their shared heartbeat. Lenara curled into Clark's arms, her skin glowing softly with contentment. We're going to be parents, she whispered. He kissed her shoulder. And diplomats, and teachers, and whatever else this mad galaxy needs. A quiet beat passed. Clark? She asked, her voice barely a breath. Yeah? Promise me we'll never forget how this all began. He reached into the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a small, well-worn item, the original bar's empty wrapper. I couldn't forget if I tried, he said. Then, with their bodies wrapped together and their minds humming in perfect sync, they drifted into sleep beneath the twin moon's two souls, once separate, now woven into something entirely new. A beginning forged not from treaties or battles, but from the smallest act of kindness, not the end.